Chapter 1: A Chance Encounter. Late in the afternoon, the city lights shimmered, but they couldn't dispel the gloom of the persistent drizzle. Marcus pulled up the collar of his coat and walked quickly through the crowded streets, eager to return home after a long day of work. His tired steps carried him past the hurried crowd, the honking cars, and the street vendors calling out their final offers, all blending into the familiar symphony of the city at night. As a young millionaire, Marcus Johnson owned everything many people dreamed of: a successful career, luxury cars, and a magnificent mansion in the heart of the city. But at this moment, his mind wasn't on any of that. All he could think about was a hot bath and the soft embrace of his sofa waiting for him at home. Suddenly, Marcus froze in the middle of the street. He patted his vest pocket, empty. His heart began to race as a wave of worry surged through him. His black leather wallet was gone. "Must have been when I bought coffee," he muttered, turning around and weaving through the crowd, clinging to the faint hope that he might find it. Just as Marcus was about to give up, a soft voice called out from behind him, "Sir, you dropped this." Marcus turned around. Standing before him was a woman with disheveled hair and tattered clothes, soaked from the rain. She held out his wallet with trembling hands. Marcus stared in surprise. The woman looked exhausted, but her eyes shone with sincerity. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." Marcus awkwardly took the wallet and checked inside. Nothing was missing. "It's nothing. It wasn't mine," she replied with a faint smile, as if returning it was the most natural thing to do. Marcus felt something unfamiliar stir within him. In a city where everyone rushed to care for themselves, this woman's actions caught him off guard. He took a closer look at her worn-out clothes, the frayed shoes barely holding together. Raindrops slid down her tangled hair, and her face bore the marks of fatigue. "Have you eaten anything yet?" Marcus asked, feeling an unexpected surge of compassion. The woman shook her head slightly. Marcus glanced at the Bentley parked nearby, then turned back to her. "Would you like to come home with me, take a hot shower, and have something to eat?" Marcus hesitated slightly, unsure of how she would react. The woman's eyes flashed with hesitation, filled with caution. "I don't want to be a bother." "It's not a bother at all. I owe you a great deal," Marcus replied with a gentle smile, his voice filled with sincerity. After a few moments of silence, the woman nodded, her voice soft. "A hot bath. That sounds wonderful." Marcus smiled, opened the car door, and gestured for her to get in. As the luxury car glided through the misty streets, Julia, the homeless woman, gazed out at the city through the fogged-up glass, feeling as though she had stepped into a strange dream. Meanwhile, Marcus had no idea that this encounter would change both of their lives forever. Welcome to Soul Stories. Today we bring you a heartwarming tale. Let us know which city you're tuning in from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to catch more meaningful stories. Chapter 2: The House and Faded Memories. The Bentley glided slowly along the cobblestone road, its headlights casting a warm glow over the quiet neighborhood of Marcus's estate. Julia sat silently in the passenger seat, her hands tightly clasped, feeling the stark contrast between her world and the man sitting beside her. The car stopped in front of a large wrought iron gate. As it slowly opened, Julia couldn't hide the astonishment in her eyes. Before her stood a magnificent house with classic European architecture. Rows of carefully trimmed trees lined the path leading to an intricately carved wooden door. Light spilled from within, illuminating the vast garden that stretched out in front. Julia instinctively took a step back as Marcus opened the car door for her. You live here?" she stammered, her voice so soft it nearly dissolved into the air. Marcus smiled gently, as if this grand estate was nothing out of the ordinary. "It's just a house. Come in. Don't worry." Julia stepped inside cautiously, feeling as though she had just set foot into another world. As the door closed behind her, she stood still, overwhelmed by the luxury of the interior. The high ceiling soared above her, adorned with a massive crystal chandelier that hung like a piece of art. Classical oil paintings lined the hallways, while the marble floors shimmered under the soft lights. Everything was so immaculate that Julia hesitated to take another step. "I don't think I should be here." Julia lowered her head, her voice trailing off in discomfort. Marcus looked at her, his eyes gentle and understanding. Julia, you did something good today. Consider this a small thank you. You deserve it. After a moment of hesitation, Julia nodded slightly. All right, just for a little while. Marcus gestured to a nearby maid. Please show her to the guest bathroom. The maid bowed politely and led Julia upstairs. As she walked down the long hallway, Julia felt the unfamiliarity of her surroundings pressing in. When the bathroom door opened, Julia froze. Before her was a bathroom larger than the fanciest hotel rooms she had only seen on television. A marble bathtub sat beneath the soft glow of the lights, with neatly folded white towels resting beside it. Julia reached out hesitantly, her fingertips grazing the cool marble surface. Feel free to take your time. If you need anything, just call for me, the maid said softly before quietly stepping out. As the door closed, Julia stood there for a long moment, unable to believe what was happening. Hot water cascaded down her skin, washing away the cold, the dirt, and the exhaustion she had carried for months. Julia closed her eyes, letting the water cleanse everything, but old memories began to surface. Once Julia had been a strong woman. She owned a small clothing boutique downtown. Her mother, whom Julia admired greatly, often told customers that her daughter was her greatest pride. Julia recalled the difficult early days of opening her shop, but after years of hard work, she had built a small brand with loyal customers. Life wasn't lavish, but it was full and peaceful. Everything changed when her mother passed away after a sudden illness. The loss shattered Julia. The man she trusted most, her partner, left her during that time, not only abandoning her, but also taking all the savings she had worked so hard to accumulate for the store. Left with nothing, Julia lost her shop, her home, and ultimately her faith in life. When she opened her eyes, Julia realized that tears had mingled with the flowing water streaming down her face. Julia stepped out of the bathroom, wrapping herself in the soft robe Marcus had left for her. She descended the stairs, her bare feet brushing against the cool wooden floor. Marcus sat on the sofa in the living room, his gaze lifting from his laptop as Julia appeared. In that moment, Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, as if something familiar had just crossed his mind. You look different, Marcus said after a brief pause. Julia smiled faintly, though a trace of embarrassment flickered in her eyes. Probably just because I'm clean, she joked, trying to ease the awkwardness. Marcus didn't laugh. He stood and stepped closer. What's your name? Julia. Marcus's face stiffened, a subtle yet noticeable shift in his expression. Julia, what's your last name? Julia Bennett. Marcus froze. The name echoed in his mind like a forgotten puzzle piece that had finally been found. You're Julia Bennett, from Hillside Middle School? Julia looked up at Marcus, her eyes widening in disbelief. Yes. How do you know that? Marcus chuckled softly, but there was a hint of emotion trembling beneath his voice. Because I'm Marcus Johnson, the boy you used to protect from bullies all through middle school. Chapter 3. Recognition. The past returns. Marcus stood there, gazing at Julia with eyes filled with astonishment and emotion. For a few fleeting seconds, the world around them seemed to pause. Julia, is it really you? Don't you recognize me? Marcus's voice trembled, as if he couldn't believe what was unfolding before him. Julia furrowed her brow, confusion flashing in her eyes. She studied Marcus carefully, as though she was rifling through the dusty drawers of forgotten memories. Marcus? You mean Marcus Johnson? Julia spoke slowly, her lips quivering slightly. Marcus nodded, a faint smile curling at the corner of his lips. It's me, Marcus. Julia stood frozen, her wide eyes reflecting disbelief. Like puzzle pieces snapping into place, fragments of memories began flooding back, rewinding to a time when they were just children. The image of a thin boy with thick glasses, always walking with his head down in the long corridors of their middle school, appeared vividly in Julia's mind. Marcus had been that timid boy, frequently teased by the bigger, rowdier kids. Julia, the girl with long brown hair and bright eyes, was the only one who neither feared nor avoided Marcus when he was bullied. Instead, she consistently stood up for him, ready to confront anyone who dared to harm Marcus. She recalled one particular incident when Marcus was cornered by a group of boys in the schoolyard, simply because he wore worn-out shoes. Julia had rushed over, placing herself protectively in front of him, and firmly declaring, "If you want to mess with him, you'll have to go through me first." From that day on, Julia became Marcus's confidant and his greatest source of strength. They grew inseparable, sharing late study sessions, school field trips, and the dreams they whispered about during their youth. Even though Marcus was shy and quiet, he felt safe whenever Julia was by his side. She was the one friend who believed in him, encouraging him whenever he felt lost. Julia remembered one summer afternoon during their final year of middle school. Marcus had sat alone on the steps behind the school, clutching his worn-out backpack. "You can't keep living like this, Marcus," Julia had said as she sat beside him, her eyes filled with determination. Marcus sighed softly, adjusting his glasses before replying in a faint voice. "I don't know how to change. Maybe I was just born this way." Julia smiled, her eyes gleaming under the fading sunlight. "No, Marcus, I believe you can change. You can do anything if you set your mind to it, and I'll always be here to support you." Those simple words ignited a spark within Marcus. It became the driving force that pushed him to overcome his insecurities, eventually shaping him into the successful man he was today. Returning to the present, Julia looked at Marcus, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't believe it. Is it really you, Marcus?" Julia whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Marcus smiled gently, nodding. "I never imagined we'd meet again. Under these circumstances." Julia lowered her gaze, suddenly feeling self-conscious about her current state. I'm sorry for how I look. I'm not the same as I was back then." She fidgeted, pulling the robe Marcus had given her tighter around her. Marcus shook his head, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Julia, you were the one who helped me through the toughest times of my life. Now it's my turn to help you." Julia bit her lower lip, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Marcus, you really don't have to do this. I've changed." Marcus met her gaze, his voice steady and warm. "Julia, you haven't changed. To me, you're still the girl who stood up for me all those years ago. And I owe you, more than you know." The two stood quietly in Marcus's lavish living room, but in that moment, time seemed to stop. They were no longer Marcus the millionaire and Julia the homeless woman. They were simply Marcus and Julia, as they had been in those distant school days. Chapter 4. Reunion, Years of Loss. Julia sat across from Marcus in his spacious living room. The room was quiet, with only the faint patter of rain tapping against the window. The cup of tea Marcus had placed in front of her had long gone cold, untouched. Julia's gaze dropped to the table, her thin hands clasped tightly together, a habit she had developed whenever she felt anxious. Marcus sat silently, his eyes gentle yet filled with concern he couldn't quite hide. "Julia, can you tell me what happened?" Marcus asked softly, his voice calm but careful, as if afraid to reopen old wounds. Julia remained silent for a moment, her eyes lingering on the flickering flames in the fireplace. The warmth from the fire filled the room, but did little to dispel the cold lingering within her heart. She drew in a deep breath as though gathering the courage to confront her past. "Everything started to fall apart after my mother passed away." Julia's voice was as light as a breeze, yet every word felt like a sharp cut to Marcus's heart. "My mother was everything to me. When she was gone, I lost my way. The shop kept running, but I didn't have the strength to care for it like before. Everything slowly slipped away, and I couldn't stop it." Marcus nodded slightly, remembering the stories Julia used to tell about her mother when they were younger. He had always known how much Julia's mother meant to her, the foundation of her life. He could only imagine the pain of such a loss. Julia continued, her voice fading to a whisper. "At the time, I put my trust in the one person I thought would never leave me. My boyfriend." Marcus looked up, noticing how Julia's expression darkened as she spoke of memories she likely wished to forget. "At first, he promised to help me get the shop back on track. I believed him, but it was all lies." Julia gave a faint, bitter laugh, but Marcus could see the lingering pain and resentment in her eyes. He didn't just take my money. He left me the moment I fell into debt. The shop closed. The debts piled up. I lost everything. And eventually I turned to alcohol, hoping to forget it all. Marcus's hands tightened into fists, his gaze darkening. He couldn't believe that Julia, the strong, resilient girl he had admired, had endured such betrayal and hardship. I wandered everywhere, with no place to go. Friends drifted away, and eventually, I became homeless. Julia let out a soft sigh, but this time it wasn't one of despair. It was one of acceptance. You know, Marcus, the scariest part of living on the streets isn't hunger or cold. It's the feeling of being forgotten. I walk past hundreds of people every day, but no one stopped. They looked at me like I was invisible. Marcus remained silent, unsure of how to respond. Although Julia spoke with a calm demeanor, Marcus could sense the depth of the wounds hidden beneath her words. His heart ached, not because of how Julia looked now, but because he saw a different Julia, one who had once been strong but was now burdened by loneliness and pain. "Why didn't you come find me?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. Julia shook her head gently. "How could I? You had built a good life for yourself. I didn't want to bother you or drag you into my mess." Marcus held her gaze, his eyes soft yet unwavering. His life, despite its wealth and success, had long felt empty, as though something crucial was missing, something he couldn't quite place. And now, as he looked at Julia, he realized what he had been searching for all along was sitting right in front of him. "You could never be a bother, Julia. No matter where you are or what's happened, I'm still your friend." Julia lifted her head, meeting Marcus's eyes with tears pooling at the corners of her own. I forgot what it felt like to have someone believe in me." Marcus smiled softly, his expression resolute. "Then let me remind you, I'm here now, and I won't let you go through this alone." The room fell silent, but for the first time in years, Julia felt warmth seep into the cracks of her heart. At that moment, sitting across from Marcus, Julia no longer felt like the homeless woman wandering the streets. She felt like Julia from years ago, the girl Marcus had once admired and believed in. And perhaps this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Are you still following this story on our Soul Stories channel? Comment pizza to let us know you're still with us. Chapter 5. The Road to Recovery, A New Beginning. The early morning sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of Marcus's living room. Julia sat on the sofa, her gaze distant as she looked out at the sunlit garden beyond. Despite having slept soundly in the warmth of Marcus's home, her heart still felt heavy. Marcus entered the room carrying a cup of hot tea, which he gently placed on the table in front of her. He sat down across from Julia, his eyes filled with warmth, but also firm determination. "Julia, I think it's time for you to start over," Marcus said softly. Julia looked up, but her eyes darted away, unable to meet his gaze. "Marcus, I don't know if I can..." Marcus cut her off, his voice steady and persuasive. "You can. I know you can. But you don't have to do it alone." Julia sat quietly. She knew Marcus was right. Life on the streets had driven her to rely on alcohol to numb the pain, but if she truly wanted to start anew, she had to let go of those habits. That afternoon, Marcus drove Julia to a private rehabilitation center just outside the city. The facility was surrounded by lush green trees, a stark contrast to the noisy and chaotic places Julia had grown accustomed to. Before stepping through the gates, Julia turned to Marcus, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I'm scared. What if I fail again?" Marcus gently took her hand, his eyes reflecting unwavering patience and belief. "If you fall, I'll be here to help you get back up. But I believe this time, you won't." Julia gave a slight nod. The first few days at the center were far from easy. Julia battled relentless cravings for alcohol, splitting headaches, and vivid nightmares that jolted her awake in the middle of the night. Each morning, she sat by the window of her treatment room for hours, wondering if she was on the right path. There were times when the isolation and fear overwhelmed her, pulling her back toward the brink of despair. But every time she felt like giving up, Marcus was there. He wasn't just providing financial support for her treatment, he became a constant source of emotional encouragement. "I'll visit you every week, I promise." And he kept that promise. Every weekend, Marcus showed up, bringing books Julia loved, small treats she missed, and stories about life beyond the walls of the rehab center. "You're not alone, Julia." His presence became the light that guided her through the darkest days. Slowly, Julia began to change. She joined group therapy sessions where people shared their experiences. For the first time in years, Julia felt she wasn't alone in her struggles. Following Marcus's advice, she started journaling her thoughts in a small notebook. "Write everything down, Julia. It's a way to face yourself," Marcus had told her. Marcus was more than just an old friend. He was the person who pushed Julia to reflect on herself and confront the shadows of her past. Little by little, Julia learned to let go of the guilt and forgive herself. Each morning she felt a shift, a subtle but powerful transformation in her heart. "I'm starting to believe that maybe I really can start over, Marcus," Julia said one day. Marcus smiled, his eyes full of pride. "I've always believed in you, Julia, from the day you stood up for me in middle school until now." Julia's journey to reclaim her life wasn't quick or simple, but as each day passed, Marcus saw the light returning to her eyes, the same light of the strong-willed girl he once knew. 3 months later, Julia completed her treatment. As she stepped out of the rehab center, she took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air she hadn't appreciated in so long. Marcus stood waiting just outside the gates, just as he had promised. "Are you ready to start a new chapter?" Julia looked at Marcus and smiled softly, the smile of someone who had been reborn. "I think I am." Chapter 6. Love Blossoms from Friendship. The warm rays of spring sunlight began to weave through the streets, slowly melting away the cold that had lingered through the long winter months. Julia had completed her treatment and was starting a new life. Though challenges still lay ahead, each day felt like a small step toward regaining normalcy. Marcus kept his promise. He stayed by Julia's side, not just as an old friend, but as a companion who never strayed far. A growing closeness. Meeting up became a routine for them. On quiet weekend afternoons, they often found themselves at a small cafe tucked away on a peaceful street corner. Julia liked sitting by the window, watching the bustling streets outside where people hurried by, each carrying their own untold stories. "Do you remember? This cafe used to be a little bakery we'd stop by after school," Marcus said, stirring his coffee gently. Julia laughed, her eyes sparkling with nostalgia. "How could I forget? You always ordered croissants, and I'd get apple pie every time." Marcus chuckled. "I can't believe you remember that much detail." "How could I forget a childhood friend?" Julia replied, her voice warm. Their conversation stretched into the evenings, weaving together memories from school days, with stories of work and life now. They took walks in the park, watched sunsets by the lake, and sometimes simply sat together in silence. Being with Marcus felt effortless for Julia, as if she could let her guard down and simply be herself. Marcus, on the other hand, began to notice something. Julia was no longer the mischievous girl from their youth. She had grown into a resilient, graceful woman, shaped by her experiences. Despite everything she had endured, Julia retained the strength and kindness that Marcus had always admired. Every time Julia laughed, Marcus's heart beat faster. He often caught himself quietly watching her, wondering when his feelings had shifted beyond friendship. He began to notice the smallest things, the way Julia tucked her hair behind her ear when she felt shy, how intently she listened when he spoke, and the softness in her eyes when she watched the world around her. One afternoon, as they strolled through the park, Marcus suddenly stopped. "Julia, I've been thinking about something." Marcus hesitated, his gaze meeting hers. Julia turned to him, curiosity flickering in her eyes. But before Marcus could continue, Julia quickly looked away, the smile on her lips fading. "Marcus, don't," Julia whispered. Marcus frowned. "Why not, Julia?" She remained silent for a moment before speaking softly, her voice heavy with emotion. "I know what you're about to say, Marcus, but I don't think I deserve it." Marcus stood still, taken aback. "Julia, why would you say that?" Julia turned to face him, tears pooling in her eyes. Marcus, I was a failure. I lost everything. I wandered the streets, and no matter how much I try, I can't erase that part of me. Marcus gently took her hand, his eyes unwavering. Julia, you've been through things most people couldn't imagine, but that's what makes you strong. I don't care about your past. I care about the person standing in front of me now. Julia lowered her head and tears began to stream down her face. I'm scared. If you knew everything, you wouldn't see me the same way. Marcus softly lifted her chin, his gaze locking with hers. I already know everything, Julia, and I'm still here. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. In that moment, Julia felt the sincerity in every word Marcus spoke. Despite the lingering fear, his warmth made her feel safe, as if, for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. Chapter 7. Overcoming the Past. Time passed and Julia and Marcus continued to see each other. Though their bond grew deeper with each passing day, Julia couldn't shake the lingering fear in her heart. Despite Marcus's kindness and affection, she couldn't stop thinking about the gap between her past and the man Marcus had become, a successful businessman living in a grand estate. Marcus noticed. He saw the flicker in Julia's eyes whenever they were together, happiness tinged with hesitation. He didn't blame her. Marcus understood that Julia needed time to learn how to trust herself again, to believe she was worthy of love. Whenever Julia steered away from conversations that touched on their feelings, Marcus simply smiled and gently reminded her, Your past doesn't define you, Julia. I love who you are now, not what happened before. But Marcus knew that words alone weren't enough. Julia needed something more, a moment powerful enough to pull her out of the shadows of her past. One weekend afternoon, Marcus drove to Julia's home and extended an invitation. It's a beautiful day. Let's go for a walk? Julia agreed with a soft nod, but she hadn't anticipated where Marcus was taking her. Hillside Middle School, the place they had both attended as children. As they walked through the old iron gates, Julia hesitated for a brief moment. Childhood memories crept back slowly, unraveling piece by piece. The long hallways, the basketball court, and the grassy field where they used to sit and talk. Marcus smiled, catching the flicker of nostalgia and surprise on Julia's face. Do you remember? This is where you saved me countless times. Julia chuckled lightly, though there was still a hint of shyness in her voice. You were so timid back then. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Marcus stopped in front of the basketball court, a place that had once been a battlefield for mischievous schoolboys. His eyes softened as he turned to Julia. Julia, you were always the strongest person I knew. You stood up for me when no one else did. Now it's my turn to do the same for you. Julia looked up, her gaze meeting Marcus's. She could feel the sincerity and unwavering conviction in his words. Marcus, I don't want you to feel like you have to carry my burdens. Marcus shook his head gently and took a step closer, his hands softly wrapping around hers. You're not a burden, Julia. You're someone I care deeply about. I want to stand by you, not because I feel obligated, but because I love you. Julia's eyes widened in surprise, tears beginning to gather at the corners. Marcus smiled, his expression tender but steady. I've waited a long time to say this, but I don't want you to feel pressured. I just want you to remember one thing. You deserve happiness, Julia, and I'll be here, waiting until you're ready. Julia couldn't hold back her tears any longer. For the first time in years, warmth spread through her heart, breaking down the walls she had built around herself. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for not giving up on me. Marcus gently pulled Julia into his arms, as if to silently promise her once more. He wouldn't let her go again. That day, standing together in their old schoolyard, Julia felt the chains of her past slowly loosen. Her past no longer felt like a weight dragging her down. Instead, it became a part of her story, a story she and Marcus would continue to write, together. Chapter 8. A Heartfelt Proposal. The sun dipped slowly toward the horizon, casting a golden hue over the old schoolyard. Julia and Marcus sat on the same bench they had occupied countless times after school. The gentle breeze rustled through the trees, and the rustling leaves seemed to whisper stories from the years gone by. Julia rested her head on Marcus's shoulder, feeling the rare peace she had long sought. Her worries and insecurities gradually faded, replaced by warmth and trust in his presence. Marcus gently took Julia's hand, his eyes drifting toward the basketball court where young boys once played. "Julia!" Marcus spoke softly, his voice barely louder than the wind. Julia looked up, curiosity flickering in her eyes as she met his tender gaze. "I've been thinking a lot about you, about us, and everything we've been through." Julia smiled gently, squeezing his hand. "I know. I've been thinking the same." Marcus drew in a deep breath, then unexpectedly stood. Before Julia could react, he knelt on one knee in the middle of the schoolyard, the very place where Julia had once stood between him and the bullies more than 10 years ago. Julia froze, her heart pounding. Marcus's eyes locked onto hers, glowing with sincerity and certainty. From his jacket pocket, he retrieved a small velvet box and slowly opened it. Inside lay a simple yet elegant silver ring, reflecting the warm light of the setting sun. "Julia Bennett, you saved me during those difficult childhood years. You were my best friend, and now you are the woman I love and cherish more than anyone." Julia brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes shimmering under the twilight. "I can't imagine my life without you by my side. You've been a part of me for so long. Today I want to ask, will you walk this life with me, not just now, but forever?" Marcus paused, his voice softening even further. "Julia, will you marry me?" Julia sat still, as if time itself had slowed. She looked at Marcus, her childhood friend, the one who had stood by her through her darkest days. The memories of their youth flooded back. The timid, scrawny Marcus she had once protected now knelt before her, waiting for an answer, his eyes filled with hope. Tears welled in Julia's eyes and began streaming down her cheeks. She couldn't hold back the overwhelming emotions. "Marcus, are you sure?" Julia's voice trembled as she spoke, barely able to contain her feelings. Marcus smiled softly, his gaze unwavering. "I've never been more certain of anything." Julia began to cry, but this time they were tears of joy. She nodded repeatedly, unable to form words beyond the radiant smile and tear-filled eyes. "Yes, I will, Marcus." Marcus's face lit up, as if the entire world had just been set aglow. With gentle care, he slipped the ring onto her finger. The ring, though simple, felt like a profound symbol of their love and unbreakable bond. Marcus rose to his feet, pulling Julia into his arms. They embraced tightly, standing in the schoolyard that had witnessed so many of their memories. "Thank you, Julia, for saying yes to being a part of my life." Julia smiled, resting her head against Marcus's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "I should be the one thanking you, Marcus, for standing by me when I felt most unworthy. I didn't think I deserved this happiness, but I promise, I'll treasure it every day." As the sun set behind the trees, they stood hand in hand, as if time had never passed. And in that moment, they both knew. This was just the beginning of a new journey, a journey of two people who had once lost each other, but had finally found their way back. Chapter 9. A Happy Ending. The Wedding and Everlasting Happiness. The radiant autumn sun bathed the small garden in golden light, where Marcus and Julia's intimate yet heartfelt wedding was taking place. The garden, nestled behind Marcus's mansion, was the very spot where Julia had first stepped into his life again, the day she returned his wallet. The space was adorned with strings of twinkling lights and delicate white flowers scattered along the pathway. Rows of simple wooden chairs lined each side, draped with soft silk ribbons. It wasn't extravagant, nor was the guest list extensive, but the wedding overflowed with sincerity and the warmth of everyone present. Julia wore a simple yet elegant wedding dress. The gown, light and pure, mirrored her essence, gentle but full of resilience. As she walked slowly down the aisle, tears welled in her eyes as she saw the familiar faces of loved ones smiling back at her. In the front row sat Marcus and Julia's old friends from middle school. But what moved Julia the most was the presence of those who had stood by her during her time in rehab. These were the people who had shared her most challenging moments, and now they stood beside her, witnessing this new chapter of joy. At the end of the aisle, Marcus waited with bright eyes, his gaze never leaving Julia as she approached. When she finally reached him, he gently took her hand and whispered, "I told you, you're the one I always wanted by my side." Julia smiled, her eyes shimmering with tears. "And I feel the same, Marcus." As they exchanged vows beneath the golden sunlight, applause and quiet sobs of happiness echoed through the garden. After the wedding, Marcus devoted himself to helping Julia realize a dream she had long left behind, opening a small clothing boutique. The shop, tucked away on a quiet neighborhood corner, wasn't large, but it was just the right size for Julia to begin anew. She carefully selected each piece, pouring her heart in designing and curating collections with the same passion she once had. Above the small storefront, Julia hung a simple sign that read, "Where every beginning matters." Julia's shop became more than just a place to buy clothes. It became a space where she listened, shared, and connected with others who, like her, had once lost their way. Some customers had been homeless, while others had recently left rehab. Julia welcomed them, offering advice and sometimes even a helping hand. She became a beacon of hope in the community, a testament to the fact that people can rise from the ashes of their past if given the right support and a little belief. Marcus continued his work, but every afternoon, he would visit Julia's shop. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments, but this time as husband and wife. Julia often told Marcus, "Life isn't always easy, but as long as we have each other, I believe we can overcome anything." Marcus would nod, holding her hand tightly. "And I'll always be by your side, just like you once stood by mine." Together, they built a life that was simple yet full of happiness. There was no need for lavish displays, just the joy of waking up next to each other, building their future hand in hand, and spreading kindness to those around them. Sometimes all it takes is a hand reaching out at the right moment to dispel the darkness, making room for light and hope. Julia once protected Marcus as a child, and in return, Marcus became the guiding light that led Julia out of her darkest days. Their love stood as a living reminder that kindness and genuine love can transform lives, pulling people from the depths of despair to the heights of happiness. Thank you for following this story. Please rate it from 1 to 5 stars, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our Soul Stories channel.